Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. I'm Ian Stone.
I'm Neil Munro.
So today we're talking about asbestos management plan audits. Now, a lot of people don't know about asbestos management plan audits. They might have heard of asbestos management plan, but not the actual audit or the necessity around it to actually do an audit and make sure it's working.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you're one of the half of the clients that actually have a management plan, a lot of people tick that box. But again, it kind of gets either stored electronically or put on the shelf somewhere and kind of forgotten about, rightly or wrongly, whether they're fully following the procedures in it. But actually part, and probably the most important part of managing new asbestos under Regulation 4 is actually regularly reviewing it, auditing it, and making sure it is relevant and up to date. That's kind of like the biggest kind of fall down is, yeah, it's all good if you've ticked the box and you've got an asbestos management plan, but actually, is it working? And the audit is where you kind of pick that information up to ensure that everything is still working as you planned.
That's it, indeed. I mean, the asbestos management plans shouldn't be a tick box exercise. They should be bespoke to you and your business and how it runs and how you manage that asbestos. And it is different from business to business. It's even different within businesses from site to site. Not all two sites are the same. So therefore, the asbestos management plan needs to be bespoke so that everything that's in play in that playbook essentially is being followed.
Yeah, it can be as simple and straightforward as you like, or it can be as complex as it's needed to be. As Ian said, taking into account all your internal procedures, all the way that your company works and how it operates should be encompassed into that asbestos management plan. And the effectiveness of that asbestos management plan really does boil down to those points and how that interacts between keeping people safe and working day to day with your company procedures.
Yeah, and like you say, I mean, a lot of companies have one, tick the box, stick it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Which
been told I've got to have one. It's kind of like an asbestos survey.
Yeah.
Been told I've got to have one, so I've done one. And that kind of sort of bleeds into the asbestos management. I've been told I need one, so I've got one. Never look at it.
Never look at it. But then that said, if it's a good asbestos management plan, it's easy to follow and it does manage asbestos nice and easy. So whether they don't even look at it for the year, the fact that, I don't know, in the management plan, it will say, when you come to site, you must review the register that's on the front desk, sign it, all the rest of it. If all those things are in place, then it is easy enough to follow. However, you only know if it's working when you review it. And that's the point. The regulations state that it needs to be reviewed at least annually, the information. And like you said earlier, it is at that point that you then essentially pick it apart. Because especially for the first time, or the first time you implement that piece of paperwork, just throwing it in and hoping for the best, with the best will in the world, you'd sit there, you'd plan it out on, like you said, how to kind of integrate it into your system. So it's not something crazy and new and weird. It's just something that runs alongside what you're already doing. And then just to leave it in play without checking it is rather silly, because the thing is, the best will in the world, us as humans, we sit there, we think we've got everything covered. We'll go off a year later down the line, we'll review it. And it's like, oh, actually, I didn't think of that. And that is the point of the management plan review.
Yeah.
The review is there to pick holes. It is to fault find what are the issues. Have there been issues? If there's been an incident over the year, how did that incident happen? Was it because the asbestos management plan didn't cover that issue, or was it other things that came into play that people needed training, or whatever it is? I mean, I don't know. That's the whole point of it. The review should cover all of those things off.
Yeah, so the bare minimum is to kind of review that on an annual basis. However, it should be, a review of the asbestos management procedures and your asbestos management plan should always be triggered if there's a change. So if there's a change in personnel,
that is a biggie.
If there's a change in the building, if you've had works carried out on your asbestos, if you've had it repaired, removed, basically any change within the business should always trigger a review of this plan, because especially when personnel change, if somebody's replaced in their job, not all the information is always passed over.
No.
So that new person needs to be refreshed on these procedures, and it may actually change the way that the asbestos management plan works. Any change within the business, any sort of reconfiguration of the buildings, refurb works, asbestos works, anything really should trigger a review. That review might be, everything's still fine, it's still business as usual.
Yeah, we've made changes, but there's no issue here.
It's just that sort of draw a line in the sand of going, right, it's just a stop. Is it all still working? Yes, it is. Nothing's changed. The same personnel. All we've done is we've just literally taken a door out or something like that. That's a simple review. It's just having that forefronted and that in mind to actually carry out that procedure every time something happens.
Like you say, definitely personnel changes. I mean, at the moment, we're seeing in the news that there's a lot of redundancies and people being let go from companies because of the fallout from COVID and the economy being affected as it is. And again, this is another thing that could easily slip under the radar with those personnel changes. Because like you say, if asbestos isn't your day-to-day job and it only comes up once in a blue moon, then this easily will go by the wayside and it'll be forgotten about.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of things that are checked in an audit?
Well, I think, first of all, as part of the asbestos management plan audit, I suppose you should be looking at the asbestos itself first.
Yeah. First and foremost, the asbestos re-inspection. Yeah. Has it been done?
Yeah. And again, that will vary depending on what you'd already kind of planned. So that will vary on the overall risk for those asbestos materials and the frequency of those inspections as detailed within your asbestos management plan. And it's basically reviewing, is that frequency still enough for maintaining a safe working environment, or does something need to change? So, for instance, whatever you've assessed the overall risk of the asbestos materials, is that enough for the frequency of the re-inspections? So if you've got a high-risk asbestos material in a high-risk area, checking it once a year is probably not enough. You probably need to be doing that, if not weekly, it could be daily, because of the overall risk from those materials and the risk of people being exposed to it. And it's kind of reviewing this asbestos management plan is reviewing those procedures as opposed to actually reviewing the materials themselves.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's the paper trail element of that asbestos needs checking, like you say, weekly. Has that actually happened?
Yeah.
And it's the paper trail version of that to make sure that in the register it has been reviewed and it's been signed off and the dates are in there and somebody's signed to say they've done it each week.
Yeah.
Because if there's big gaps in there, well, why?
Yeah.
And I mean, just thinking of things that can happen. So if one person's on site is trained and competent to inspect their asbestos, well, what happens when they go away on holiday? Are there gaps in there? And if you're checking something like even daily, well, what happens for the 2 weeks that the caretaker's away?
Yeah.
There are going to be gaps in there, which again, it's finding those things because those are the elements that leave you open to issues happening, accidents happening, which then can bring things, prosecution, fines, all the rest of it. Because ultimately, if you have those gaps, you're not managing your asbestos efficiently.
Yeah. And this is also building up evidence that your asbestos management plan is actually working, or it's identifying gaps within the asbestos management plan. And that's a good example of it. If your asbestos management plan says you need to check the asbestos materials on a weekly basis, and you're building up a record of, okay, yeah, we're checking the asbestos every single week. Here's the evidence that we're doing it, and here's the evidence that there's no damage. And equally, therefore you may be able to sort of amend those procedures. If it's costing you a lot to actually do that weekly check on the materials, and you've got evidence, okay, we've done a year of checking it every single week and we've got no disturbance. You may be able to then, okay, we're going to move to fortnightly, because
you can look at scaling it back a bit.
We've got the evidence now that nothing's been damaged.
That's a really good point. And alongside that, and another reason for doing these and identifying it and actually getting it written down is it's your get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
If, lo and behold, something happens, an asbestos incident happens on site, however, for the last 3 years, you've had an asbestos management plan audit, it's proven, written down in paper, that everything is all sorted.
Yeah.
And like I say, an incident happens, the HC get involved, it's a RIDOR incident, they investigate. Well, that's your get out of jail free, because instead of it just going on hearsay, no, asbestos is fine.
Yeah.
It's like you've got 3 years worth of evidence and audits and everything's written down. So ultimately, it kind of then does steer the investigation away from you to, well, this probably was just a one-off.
Yeah. And accidents do happen. And if you've got all the information to back up your procedures, basically, and that's what we're talking about here, and it's evidencing what you've done is working. And that's the important point from today's podcast is, this gives you the tools and the evidence to back up what you're doing is right.
Yeah. And it's also a bit of a checklist as well, really. I mean, one of the things that we'd look at is have refresher training been undertaken for the appropriate people?
Yeah.
And again, that's easily something that can get slipped off the radar.
Yeah.
Because somebody's had a awareness course once. They either change personnel, someone comes in, they've not had an awareness course. Well, at least that once a year point, you're capturing that, oh, bugger, we have changed who's looking after asbestos. And yes, we do need to get them on an awareness course.
Yeah.
Because they haven't got it for whatever reason.
But it's still also, in addition to asbestos awareness training, the regulations actually stipulate that anyone who's got a responsible role to do with asbestos should have the appropriate training. So, awareness is a big one for anyone who's likely to come into contact with asbestos. But anyone who fulfills any roles under asbestos management should have appropriate training to do their role, and that should be recorded as well. So, if you've got the caretaker who's doing re-inspections, they have to be competent and have the right training to do that. If you've got somebody who's managing the asbestos management plan, they have to be competent to actually do that. So it's all those different points which kind of get forgotten about sometimes. And particularly especially if you're the duty holder named, they have to have the appropriate training to fulfill their roles within that. And that's kind of training that gets forgotten about.
So other things that we look at within the kind of audit, registering the action plan. Like you said, sometimes it can be gone by the wayside. We've removed asbestos or we've made asbestos safe, yet in the action plan, it's still down to do.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of, this is the crossover point between what you actually want to do for the next year, which can have financial implications and management implications of your projects throughout the year. Again, it's that kind of notifier to really bring everything back into focus for that one point in a year.
Yeah.
So if asbestos does need dealing with, well, at that point, you can then have the conversation with whoever it is of, look, we need to put X amount of money aside to get this project sorted over the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And then it could get programmed in.
Yeah. And kind of off the back of that as well is if you've had works planned. So if you know that works have been carried out. So, it might even be something simple as, a bit of redecoration. It may be something simple as, we've taken a door out. Any kind of refurbishment works that have been carried out, and have the appropriate surveys been carried out for those works to identify whether asbestos is going to be disturbed. Okay, so this is a point where, you pick up if there was any gaps in that procedure, because especially with big businesses who have, project managers or
estates departments,
or if there's personnel who are just kind of free to do whatever they want within their area of the building.
Yeah, that's true.
And they go off and do stuff. This is the point where, are those procedures in place to kind of capture that asbestos doesn't get forgotten about in any work?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because, I mean, we work with some clients and there's an estates department that manages the overall section or the overall building. However, department heads do have their own budgets and can call in their own contractors to do stuff, which is outside the realms of the estates department.
It doesn't always get captured.
And it doesn't always get captured, exactly. And that happened a few times. But now, because of the audit and the review of this, changed the window. Where's the refurbishment survey for that? Oh, I haven't got one. Well, that highlights it.
Yeah.
And because that happened a few times, well, the rules within the asbestos management plan itself got changed so that somebody from estates had to sign off on orders from the department heads, because then they were the point that brought it back in and through the asbestos avenue to say, well, yep, you want that doing. Don't forget, we need to get these guys in to do the refurbishment survey.
Yeah. And it also highlighted training inadequacies for the individuals that were ordering those works, because they were unaware.
Yeah.
And again, it's just this is the benchmark to kind of bring all the awareness back to the forefront of asbestos.
Well, that's the thing, right? When you think about individuals and asbestos, if you're not in the game, you don't know a lot about it, because you don't know what you don't know. And
that's a very good statement there.
But it's true though. You don't know what you don't know, and the only way to
said that.
Hey, a wise man said that. Just because you said it the other week. But it's true though, because stuff that's outside, like a department head of a department in a property or wherever they're working, they're working and cracking on with their stuff, their day-to-day stuff, which isn't asbestos. So, kind of rightly so, they're not going to know about it unless it's picked up that there is a weakness there, there is a risk there, and then that kind of hole is then plugged with training.
Yeah, it's just kind of going back to our strapline, thinking about asbestos first, not last.
Yeah, exactly that. So other things, simple things, right, that we check on the audit. Has the contractor signing log actually been used? So some of our clients, they will have, I mentioned it earlier, they'll have a register, a book on reception, as well as the normal day-to-day signing in register. They'll have an asbestos register, which if any contractor coming to site that may disturb asbestos needs to sign in and check the register that the area that they're going to and what they're proposing to do is not going to affect anything.
Yeah.
So this is a good point to check. You've put the register on the front desk. Everything's in place, but is it actually being used?
Yeah.
And again, it's then that kind of crossover point of looking at, well, I don't know, say a school, for instance, you could look at the register and in term time, that register's being used day in, day out.
Yeah.
However, over the Easter holidays, the summer holidays, the autumn holidays, no contractor signed in. Well, that would set alarm bells ringing. Ultimately, that is when a lot of the works happen.
Yeah.
But because the personnel are not in there.
Exactly. The person on the front desk who always makes everyone sign in.
Exactly.
Is not there in the holidays.
Because he's not there, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, good point. And particularly, I've noticed as we're kind of moving away from paper as well.
Yeah. It kind of becomes more difficult to a point.
Yeah.
Unless you go all out, spend a load of cash, have an iPad at your front desk with a camera, and you have to sign in and all that. I mean, that's as good as paper, because essentially it's a physical thing to do.
Yeah.
It's when, like you say, it's checking a database online.
Yeah.
Has that happened?
Yeah, our database captures logins, and we can audit back, but it's kind of sometimes it can slip with actually making. It's that point of call when they come into site. He's checking have they logged in and checked the register. That can sometimes be a fall down. So yes, checking all those things and those points.
Yeah, and I mean ultimately all these things, they have asbestos implications for you. It changes your risk, and if you are getting these things done, and like I say, it's great to actually identify issues that have happened over the year, because this is the point of saviour. You would rather find something not happening yourself than, like I said earlier, having the HSE come in and identify that something's not been done, and that's why the whole system cocked up.
Yeah.
And I suppose one of the other things for the takeaway of this, it's for the asbestos management plan audits. I don't know any asbestos consultancy that is doing this for their clients. All I know are consultancies that are out there punting re-inspections that come out, they'll do your asbestos re-inspection, give you an updated report, and off they go. They totter off for 12 months, and then they come back to do the physical work of going around and checking the asbestos for deterioration. Who knows whether your management plan is working in that time, because they're not checking it. And if you've got somebody externally coming in to do your asbestos re-inspections, like the majority of people have, well, I kind of almost guarantee that you're not going to be checking your asbestos management plan. And that's it. It's kind of, if they coin themselves as a consultant, I'd beg to differ, because they're not ticking all the boxes that they should be for you. And if they're not doing asbestos management plan audits, if they've never mentioned them to you, if this is the first time that you've ever thought about it, well, for me, you've been let down by them, because all they're doing is the bare minimum of the easy bit, really, to kind of turn up, do the asbestos element without the extra bit. And that's the thing with the extra bit, it doesn't sound difficult, but you need somebody with decent experience to come along and do your asbestos management plan audit. They need to be a bit of a detective.
Yeah.
That they need to be able to kind of dot the I's, cross the T's, speak to people on site, have conversations, claw out information of, have there been any issues? And like I said earlier, oh, you've replaced that window, and they need to have that kind of thought in the back of the head. Right, well, I need to find a refurb survey that marries up with that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of no two audits are the same. So that's why you need somebody with experience. And that is why I believe all the consultancies out there shy away from it, because a lot of the consultancies are just sending out green surveyors that kind of do the bare minimum stuff. They've got a P402, 6 months in training, and then they're let loose.
Well, there's minimal risk sending out, barely qualified surveyors to go and do re-inspections.
Yeah.
Because essentially they're going back to have a look at something that's already been found.
They're not going to miss anything, are they?
They're not going to miss anything. So it's easy just to go, okay, you've got your P402. Yeah, you go and do them re-inspections because there's no kind of comeback on us.
No, because they have been trained to identify deterioration, which can be done, and that's all good.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's
when you start bolting on consultancy on top of that, is your asbestos management plan working, and is questioning the staff, questioning the procedures that you've put in place. You're not going to get that from a junior asbestos surveyor.
No, definitely not.
Okay. So I think that kind of covers everything.
Yeah.
I hope you found that useful. Remember, asbestos first, not last.